So there's a silent takeover happening inside your home, and it's coming through your front door every single morning.
While we argue about politics, a massive chunk of Canada's newsrooms, from the National Post to your local daily, are actually owned by a U.S. hedge fund with deep political ties.
They aren't just reporting the news, they're managing a business model designed to keep you angry enough to keep clicking. And you know what? The profits are leaving the country.
Today, we're exposing who actually owns the Canadian media, why the outrage feels manufactured, why so much coverage leans right, why the CBC matters, and the one trick you need to spot a fake narrative.
Okay, Canada, let's do a quick reality check here. When you pick up a Canadian newspaper online, you're not just reading a story, you're stepping into a business model. And in one of the biggest newspaper chains in the country, that business model is controlled in large part by a U.S. hedge fund.
And just to be clear, this isn't about blaming individual reporters. It's about ownership, budgets, and incentives. If you don't know who's paying for the newsroom and what gets rewarded, you end up mistaking a business model for a neutral mirror. And the people who keep you the angriest, well, they usually win.
Because if you think the battle is left versus right, you are already missing the biggest fight, right? The bigger fight is truth versus profit, and profit is winning way too often.
So let's start with the biggest newspaper player in Canada, Postmedia. If you live in Canada, you probably read Postmedia without even realizing it. It's the National Post, Financial Post, Ottawa Citizen, Calgary Herald, Edmonton Journal, Vancouver Sun, Montreal Gazette, and the Toronto Sun.
And Postmedia isn't just a company with a few papers. It is a network. More than 130 print and digital titles. That's a lot of local newsrooms, a lot of headlines, a lot of editorial direction flowing through all one pipeline.
Now, here's the part Canadians don't hear often enough. Postmedia is majority owned by Chatham Asset Management, a U.S. hedge fund. The ownership stake has been reported in the mid-60% range.
But wait, it gets even weirder. Chatham doesn't just own Postmedia, they own American Media Inc., which published the National Enquirer in the States. This isn't exactly a legacy of highbrow journalism here.
Exactly, Dave. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because the head of the Enquirer, David Pecker, was the guy caught in that whole catch-and-kill scandal to protect Donald Trump. For years, Pecker actually sat on the board of Postmedia right here in Canada.
So the guy helping manage Trump's image was also helping decide what gets printed in the Calgary Herald and the National Post.
And here's the kicker. Postmedia is drowning in debt. But they aren't just owing money to a bank. A massive chunk of their debt is held by Chatham itself. They're essentially paying high-interest rent to their own landlords while cutting the staff that writes your local news.
In 2019, the mask slipped. Reports came out that Postmedia's CEO issued a direct order. Every paper in the chain, from Vancouver to Halifax, had to move further to the political right. They even appointed an executive editor of politics to oversee messaging.
Think about that. It means your local editor in Edmonton or Ottawa doesn't have the final say anymore. The overall vibe and political stance are being managed from the top. It's a centralized pipeline of outrage designed to protect the interests of the people that are holding the debt.
So when you feel like every paper is saying the exact same thing at the exact same time, it's because they are. It's not a coincidence. It's a strategy. And that strategy wasn't born in Canada. It was imported here.
But here's where the czar meets the cash. Because if you're wondering why your local paper is suddenly obsessed with woke culture wars instead of investigating why your property taxes just got hiked, follow the money.
They owe hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly to their own American owners. Before a single reporter in Saskatoon or Halifax gets paid, the interest on that debt has to be shipped off to New Jersey.
Think about it. Investigative journalism is expensive. It takes months, lawyers, and travel. But an angry opinion piece about Trumpian culture wars? Well, you can write that in 20 minutes for the cost of a cup of coffee.
But here's what people tend to miss. The strongest influence isn't someone leaning over a reporter's shoulder. It's the budget. If a newsroom can't afford to dig, certain stories they never happen. And if they never happen, the public never even knows what questions to ask.
Now, newspapers are one piece of the puzzle. Television news is different. In Canada, the big TV brands are mostly owned by Canadian telecom giants. CTV sits under Bell Media, which is part of BCE. Global News is under Chorus. City News is part of the Rogers Media arm.
So if someone tells you that Canada's entire media is American-owned, that's sloppy. The strongest example is newspaper ownership concentration, especially Postmedia, while broadcast ownership is mostly Canadian corporate power. Different owners, same pressure. Money.
Exactly. Whether the owner is a hedge fund in the States or a telecom giant, the incentive is still keep the machine running, keep attention high, and keep costs down. Think about what happened to newspapers. Advertising revenue collapsed. Classifieds, they vanished, and local business ads, they all moved online. So, newsrooms got cut. When you cut the expensive part, reporting, you replace it with the cheap part. Opinion, hot takes, and conflict.
Yeah, reporting costs money. You need time, editors, lawyers, travel, documents, access. Opinion is fast, opinion is loud, and opinion is shareable.
And when the system rewards the loudest content, you get a political tilt that isn't always planned in a boardroom. It's baked into what performs. If a headline makes people furious, it travels. If a headline is nuanced, well, it dies quickly.
This is how you end up with news that feels like a constant emergency. Not because everything is an emergency, but because emergencies keep you clicking. You become addicted to your own business model. And once you train an audience to expect that, you can't just go back to calm reporting without losing traffic.
So how do we cut through it? Not with paranoia, but with discipline. First, you understand what you're reading. When a story is built like an argument, it's loaded, it has language that causes anger, villains, sweeping claims, no documents, it's trying to persuade you more than inform you.
And here's the trick. People think misinformation is always completely made up, and sometimes it's real facts that are used in a dishonest way. True detail, misleading conclusion.
And that's the danger zone, because it feels smart. It feels like you've figured something out, but you're being guided. So here's what you do in plain English. You slow down for 10 seconds and ask, what is the actual claim? Not the feeling, not the outrage, the claim.
If the claim is serious, like corruption, crime, betrayal, election wrongdoing, then the next question is, where is the evidence? Court documents, auditor reports, on-record quotes, official data, something that exists outside the writer's certainty.
Postmedia papers frequently share content. They share columnists, they share framing. That doesn't automatically make them wrong, but it means that you shouldn't treat one pipeline as the whole truth.
Yeah, cross-check with a public broadcaster, a wire service, and an outlet with different ownership. If it's real, it doesn't need one company's megaphone to exist.
The point is, if a claim is real, you should be able to find it in more than one place under more than one owner. If it only exists in one company's universe, you have to be careful and check it out.
Which is why people need to stop saying, I saw it on Facebook, like that's a source. Facebook is a delivery truck. It's not the farm. And this brings us to the CBC. The CBC isn't perfect. No newsroom is. But CBC's role is structurally different, and that was what matters.
And that's why you'll hear liberals complain that the CBC leans right, and conservatives swear that it leans left. When you're trying to be balanced, everyone notices the stories that anger them the most, and they tune out the ones that help their side. People tend to hear what they want to hear, and then they blame the broadcaster for doing it.
Yeah, if both sides are mad at you for opposite reasons, it usually means you're doing something right and dangerous in politics, telling people things that they don't want to hear.
And when the CBC gets weakened, the vacuum doesn't get filled by thoughtful local reporting. No, that won't happen.
CBC's job is not to maximize shareholders' returns. CBC's job is to provide a public service. That doesn't make them saints. It makes them a counterweight.
And when you lose counterweights, you don't get more freedom, you get more market dominance. If you weaken the CBC, the gap doesn't automatically fill with calm, careful, local reporting. It fills with cheap content and louder framing, because that's what sells and that's what the market can afford.
CBC is also one of the few places that still has the scale to cover regions that advertisers ignore. If the only rule is profit, then smaller communities become information deserts. And in information deserts, the loudest voice always wins, not the most accurate one. If you want a healthier media diet, you rotate. You don't marry one outlet and make it your personality.
Use the CBC as a baseline. Use wire coverage like the Canadian Press as plumbing. Then add papers with real reporting capacity. The Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, they both do serious reporting, and they both also have opinion sections that reflect a viewpoint. So make sure you don't confuse the two.
And if you're in Quebec or you want Quebec coverage without everything being filtered through English Canada, then read outlets like La Presse or Le Devoir. That can change what you think Canada even is.
Now, we should also say this clearly. Postmedia is not the only owner in Canada. Canada has multiple newspaper groups and ownership structures across regions. There's Black Press, Glacier Media, Quebec Corps, Torstar, and others. They're all part of the landscape.
But Postmedia is the one that deserves special attention because of concentration and because of that majority ownership stake.
And here's the part I want people to take personally. Not personally offended, but personally responsible. Because the fastest way that propaganda spreads in Canada is not in a newsroom, it's in your group chat.
It's the person who doesn't read the article, just the headline. It's the person who shares the clip without checking the full interview. It's the person who sees one story and decides it proves everything. If you only consume one pipeline, your worldview becomes a product that pipeline manufactures.
So here's the standard that we use. We don't share a claim unless we can explain it in one sentence. Point to where it came from and name at least one other outlet that confirmed it. And if we can't do that, we don't share it, even if it flatters our side. Well, especially if it flatters our side.
Because the goal here is not to win arguments at dinner. The goal is to live in a country where reality is still a shared resource.
So what's the takeaway? Well, Canada's media problem isn't one villain. It's a concentration. It's financial pressure, and it's an attention economy that rewards the worst instincts.
Postmedia is a major pipeline in newspapers, and it's majority owned by a U.S. hedge fund. People should know that when they're reading what looks like local consensus.
TV news is mostly Canadian corporate ownership, which comes with its own pressures.
CBC matters because it's built to be that counterweight. Imperfect, but structurally different. And a lot of Canada's civic oxygen depends on that.
And your job, and our job, is to stop rewarding the content that turns citizens into addicts.
All right. If this helped you see the media landscape a little clearer, then do the usual. Hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell.
And if you want the sources, the extra content, and the behind-the-scenes notes we don't always fit into this video, join us on Substack. That's where we drop the links and the deeper reads.
And if you want to back what we do and keep this channel loud and independent, join the A-Team. It helps us keep making videos that don't answer to hedge funds, lobbyists, or whatever billionaire woke up cranky today.
And also come find us on Facebook. Share the video there, tag a friend who really needs a reality check, and tell us what outlet you trust and which one you stop trusting.
And one more thing before we go, tomorrow's Flag Day. So don't just complain about Canada on the internet like it's a hobby. Get your flag, put it up, wear the red and white, show a little Canadian pride that isn't angry, isn't performative, and isn't for clicks.
Pride doesn't mean pretending we're perfect, but it means that we are worth fighting for. So we're going to keep on fighting, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Ciao for now.